Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced, head of DevRel Dremio, purveyor of things like alexmerced.com and datalakehouseHub.com. A guy who talks a lot about tech, data, development, gaming, all sorts of cool stuff. Basically what I do is kind of follow up on my conversation yesterday. So in yesterday's live stream, what I talked about is, I'll just move this out of the screen. Boop. Okay. Basically, what I was talking about yesterday was like the semantic layer. So basically, what I did is I sketched out like a whiteboard of sort of like the concept of the semantic layer and just like sort of the idea that you're trying to create a version of your data that is imbued with sort of is business-esque, has business logic, business terms, basically is understandable to that end-line business user. So what I want to do is kind of show you sort of how that kind of looks like in Dremio. Now I'm going to just show you some raw SQL. This could, of course, all be orchestrated using a tool like DBT. So there is like a Dremio DBT adapter, so that way you can, um, orchestrate that and be able to make the dependencies clear. And also, like, the other benefits of using DBT are just kind of like having like a version Git repo with your DBT code being version that you can run, and then being able to orchestrate the running of that code. Lots of really cool benefits. I have written some blogs on using Dremio DBT, which you can find on the Dremio blog. But the basic idea here, and then I'll show you the actual like result of that here in Dremio, okay, in sort of my free trial environment. So again, you can also get one of these free trial environments by just, going to dremio.com/get started. Just head over to dremio.com/get started, and you too can get one of these free trial environments. You don't need to connect your anything to it. You don't need to pay anything up front. You can just go in there, start querying data, start playing around with these concepts, and so forth. So again, whenever you have a chance, go do that. But essentially what I have, let's just kind of walk through the code first. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm just setting up my namespaces. I'm just setting up sort of like where I'm going to do these views and tables. Then I'm actually creating the raw data. So in this case, again, this is just an example. So I'm creating some raw data that represents the kind of data you would probably get in your raw layer. So oftentimes you're not getting the data, not necessarily in the data types that you like, with the column names that you like. So in this case, we're taking a look at like customer data, but you see here, like the column names aren't the most descriptive things, like customer name, customer email. Like to your inline business user, they might not look at this and immediately know what CNM is. Yes, it's customer name, and chances are if you're a data engineer, you look at this and you know exactly what it is. Um, but the idea is that, and again, notice that all the data is coming in as like a strings. Okay, this is sometimes something you'll see a lot when you're getting in like a lot of JSON data in, or where you're uploading data from like CSVs, and all the data is going to come in like as strings. Okay, so you have your data, it's just not in the most usable form. You take a look at some of these other tables we're creating. Like in this case, this is a table of like different plans that the company has, subscriptions, and usage events. Okay, people actually using whatever theoretical platform this is. But overall, again, most of the data is all like varchar or text. The column names aren't very useful. And then so basically what we want to do is we want to transform the data into something useful. Okay, so notice what we're going to be doing is not necessarily ETL, where we're moving the data and then transforming it and then landing it. Okay, we're going to be doing ELT, where the data is going to be created. We're going to have our raw zone, and then we're going to that data is now loaded as its raw format, and then we transform it as we use it. Because Dremio is going to allow you to specify those transformations through SQL views. So in that case, you don't have to duplicate the data. You don't have to do a separate loading of the data after you transform it. Okay, you're not making a separate copy. Okay, one of the beauties of using Dremio, you can just connect your raw data sources, define all your transformations in Dremio, and not necessarily have to keep replicating physical copies of the data. Okay, so in this case, here I go and I create like a silver view. So in this case, we're going to go through each of these tables. And what am I doing? I'm creating like better column names. So see, plan ID becomes plan ID, pdesk becomes plan name, things that are much more sort of descriptive. Okay, and in this case, we have a plan tier. And, in the raw data, we have a number representing the different tiers. But again, that's not something that is going to be understandable to the business line analyst. They're going to know the names of the different plans. So then we're converting that to the different names. Again, we're making this data more usable. That's the concept of transforming the data, because we're taking that sort of raw data that might have been optimized for transactional system. Sometimes, again, if you're working like with IoT devices, every character matters. So trying to find sort of the most compact way to store the data. So storing the data as a number versus storing it as a string can save you all those bits to help you sort of operate in the sort of like resource intense environments. Okay, so then you get this sort of really not pretty looking data. But again, over here, so again, we're just taking each thing, we're converting the data types into the data type they should be, all that kind of stuff. Again, cleaning names. Okay, and again, we're doing the same thing with subscriptions, where we're converting whether, basically in the raw data, we just represent whether someone's an active user just with the letter A. Again, not necessarily going to be the most clear thing to a business line user. They're going to want to see something like active or canceled, something more. And again, same thing with the AI. And again, that's the grander point here, is that anything that makes it more understandable for a business line user is going to make it more understandable for AI, because at the end of the day, AI is looking at the text. Okay, AI doesn't understand the actual real world context around this. It only knows sort of what the context that the text gives it. So the more you're using like real words and real things, it's going to provide better context for an AI to actually leverage this data versus just looking at these columns and trying to kind of figure out what they are. It can do so, but again, good data modeling and good data stewardship to provide quality data to your AI is going to end up having a much better result. Okay, so now, and again here we're just converting timestamps, so forth. So okay, so basically in these silver views, what we've done was we've cleaned up the data. So now with nice, good sort of silver staging data or modeled data, we can now go and start building out metrics. So actually, like the specific things. Okay, people aren't thinking, hey, what are my list of customers? They're thinking about, hey, who are my active subscriptions? So we can now create that metric, that measurement as a goal to view. Okay, same, and then again, that's going to use terms that people understand. So again, here we're selecting with terms, and again, all the column names already have readable semantic names. Okay, except any columns that we end up sort of deriving going forward. In this case, in this particular view, we don't. All the columns are the ones that are already in the views. But again, now it has a name that's very clear as to what the purpose of this particular view is. I'm looking at active subscriptions. Okay, I'm looking at monthly recurring revenue. Okay, and we can then derive, using the numbers in there, total monthly recurring revenue. Okay, so you can see sort of like, again, now we're crafting this into things that answer specific business questions. Okay, with business semantics, that's the whole term semantic layer. And again, the difference in the past is that, like, again, the evolution of this, as I discussed yesterday, is you would originally do this in originally you would just basically create several different physical copies, and honestly, different people would just create the same copy. Like basically, someone would create the silver layer, the model data, and then everyone would just keep recreating a lot of these particular metrics all over the place. So you end up having very inconsistent definitions of things like monthly recurring revenue or customer usage, because people are taking that same sort of master, well, I don't know if the right term would be the same master data, but the same sort of like modeled warehouse data, and then derive these metrics on their own. And then people start doing it in multiple people start doing it in the BI tool. And then so they created a semantic layer in the BI tool. So you can define it once in the BI tool, but then people started using multiple BI tools. So then you start getting, inconsistency between BI tools or different teams using different BI tools. So then you started using tools like Dremio or Cube or at scale that can allow you to define these metrics in those tools. So that way, hey, when you connect Power BI or Tableau, okay, so when you have two teams that are using both tools, they can connect to Dremio and they can pull from the same definition of customer usage summary. Thus the term sort of semantic layer. It's a layer where you can pull down your semantic definitions of data. Okay, but in the realm of AI, it goes kind of a step beyond that. It's not just sort of the data itself. So again, a good semantic view is going to be really helpful, but again, we're going to be able to also do documentation, things like that. And then again, so again, I define all my metrics here. So if I go back to Dremio, I can see that I've already ran the SQL. So I can see the SQL right over here. Okay, and subscriptions, and there's my raw, so silver, gold. I can say, hey, let me go take a look at active subscriptions. Okay. Okay, and then I can run a query there and see here. Okay, and maybe I want to see like how many different customers have active subscriptions based on their plan tier. Okay. Now what I can do is because all that stuff is pretty well described, sort of well modeled and well described in that semantic layer, And then again, I could go further and I could actually go populate the wiki. So like, actually, let's do that. Let me just make sure that I have that turned on. Okay, I think it's gonna be in project settings, preferences. Yes, I have generate wikis and labels turned on. Perfect. So now let me go to that, my gold views. So subscriptions, gold. Let me click on subscriptions. Let's just click edit. Okay, I'm gonna go to the details and I'm just gonna generate a wiki. Okay, let that generate for a second. And there we go. So yeah, you get some context. This dataset contains information about active subscriptions for customers, including their details and subscription plans. Okay, cool. Cool, and then I can also AI generate tags. Let's try generating that. And there we go, PII, subscriptions, billing management, because there's an email field in there, so that's PII. Cool. So then I have those tags. And again, I can, if I want to look up any data that has like PII in it, I can go in here, and then it'll help, define things that have PII. So you can see it contains a label PII. Okay, so I can quickly sort of like, again, make my data much more discoverable. So this semantic layer actually even helps the search. That's why it's called semantic search, because it will take a look at these other details like the wiki, like the labels, whatnot that I can AI generate. Okay, cool. Let me go back to the AI agent and say, hey, I would like to generate a bar chart illustrating how many people have active subscriptions based on plan tier. Okay. Now, in this case, I don't really have any other data that's based on subscription, so I should be able to narrow down which table I'm talking about pretty quickly and narrow down that, hey, I want that, with the word active subscriptions, narrow down that I want that gold view. Okay, let's take a look at it. See, it's already kind of pretty much figured that out. Okay, and yep, it's pretty much figured out the query already. Perfect, it's now fetching the results. Okay. It's validating the query, making sure that it runs. Okay, but basically, because of that, I'm able to ask, like, this is like a real sort of like, and there generate, like, you saw in the data earlier when I shared on the screen, that was just one person per tier. So this is accurate. And the cool thing here is I can be like, hey, here's a query. Okay, here's, so I can take a look at the query that the Dremio actually ran to make sure that it makes sense to me. And then I can take a look at the table that it generated it from to kind of make sure that, all this looks copacetic to me. But as I can see here, I was able to type pretty much I didn't have to put any weird jargon, just like kind of ask the kind of question like a business user would ask. And I was able to get a visualization pretty much right away. And the beauty of just having the ability to define these views. And again, you can define views in a lot of tools. The beauty of doing this in Dremio also is the fact that you can connect other data sources. So you're not just creating views on data you've ingested into Dremio catalog, but you can create all these views and join these data sets across other Iceberg catalogs, object storages, databases, data warehouses. You can connect your whole data world here, model all of it without having to move any data at all. Okay, now what you may want to do here and there is use reflections. Again, Dremio will kind of cache things, but Dremio already has autonomous reflection, so it'll determine when you need to do that anyways. So in that case, you can just rely on Dremio to kind of figure out, hey, when do you need reflections to accelerate what you're doing? So, so in that case, really all you have to do is focusing on modeling your data, curating that wiki, just basically getting the data sort of set up in that semantic layer, so that way your AI can take best advantage of it. You're not having to spend hours figuring out ETL jobs between these different platforms. You are, basically you can just set up a DBT project. Again, I did it right here in the UI, but in practice, you probably would want to set a DBT project, so that way you have like a version of that SQL code, so that way you can go back and like roll back the code. All the dependencies are much clearer, so it runs in the right order, all that kind of thing. But yeah, overall, pretty simple. And the great thing about like when you run that DBT code, because you're using, generally Dremio is going to be creating views, running that DBT cycle is going to be a lot less intensive. Well, like in a lot of situations, people will like use DBT and they'll create like the bronze, silver, gold layers. They'll materialize it as tables. So then they're really creating a lot of physical copies and also creating a much more physically intense processing job. Running a create view query in Dremio doesn't actually process the job right and then there. You're just creating the view definition. So technically, you don't have to actually run the query in that moment. You don't run the query until somebody actually uses the view. So you can define your whole semantic layer without actually having to necessarily run everything up front. I mean, of course, there'll be like some SQL validation and things like that. So Dremio will throw an error if the SQL doesn't validate. But you know, but the point being is that like running subsequent DBT jobs aren't going to be incrementally expensive because you're not doing a lot of re-data processing. And Dremio's DBT plugin does also have like incremental features for when you are physically uh, doing persisting data in your layers. But generally, and again, that's generally going to be, I would say, the way you want to think about it right now is that when you're using like Dremio DBT, you're really you're connecting your raw data to Dremio. You're not landing your raw data with Dremio. You're connecting your raw data to Dremio, and then you'll use like Dremio's UI, your own custom scripts, DBT, things like that, to then curate that silver and gold layer. Okay, and basically curate those transformations to those SQL views, curate the semantic layer, those gold views, curate all this these definitional stuff that really imbues like the businessy of your data. So hopefully you guys found this interesting, kind of seeing like how how Dremio sort of approaches like the semantic layer. And again, when you're connecting the MCP server, so when you're using the AI agent that you see that I saw baked in the Dremio, there's also an MCP server that you can go connect like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or your own custom AI agent tool to then be able to do everything you just saw in external tooling. Okay. And again, whether the particular tool you're using can generate charts depends. Like Claude can generate charts. Um, I don't know about off the top of my head of whether Gemini and ChatGPT have the ability to kind of generate basic charts in the UI, but you can always create your own tool and so forth. Point is, like, you have a lot of flexibility here to then take this unification of all your data sets, of the curation of your semantics, and really be able to feed your AI agents with that with very little having to rebuild the wheel, without having to rebuild MCP servers, without having to create sort of disparate semantic layers where, like, some people, what they'll do is they'll just create a Git repo with a bunch of markdown files, and then they have to create their own custom MCP server that, based on the table, will then go grab the right markdown file that has all this information on it, and then it has to kind of rethink through that. A lot of that gets sort of streamlined here for a much easier and much more deliverable agentic AI story. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I'll see you guys on the next live stream. But again, make sure you head over to Dremio.com and go try out that free trial at Dremio.com/get started. And again, if you guys enjoyed this live stream, once it's available on demand, please do share it with other people. Again, these live streams are going to be happening on different places like Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitch. So it's in lots of different places. Probably the easiest places to watch it on demand will be like YouTube and Twitter. But yeah, I'll see you guys all later.